My name is Athena, and I'm part of the To Be Hosted team doing all things creative. And tonight, I get to co-host and moderate our first ever salon. So for those of you, who don't know, a salon is traditionally a gathering for education or pleasure, and tonight we're doing a little bit of both. So of course, we have to start off with what we do best: party planning and entertaining. So hopefully you've had a chance to check out To Be Hosted's magic on social, at our supper clubs, or on Wall Entertaining magazine. And those of you who have know that we're experts at planning parties, not only for ourselves, but for our partners, including Netflix, Pepsi Diggin', Pinterest, and more. So while we're here, sipping our hot chocolate, doing a little fellowship and gathering, we get to sit down with To Be Hosted founder, Amber Mayfield Hewett, and get the tea on all things hosting and get us together before the holidays. For those of you who don't know, Amber is an entertaining expert, event producer, a culinary magazine publisher, and a Forbes 30 Under 30 recipient of 2022. She started To Be Hosted at 23 as a side hustle and has since expanded it to a full-service event agency. In 2020, she launched While Entertaining magazine, which has a focus on Black chefs and entertaining at home. Since then, she's launched 4 editions, with the 5th coming next year, plus a lot of other exciting projects. So if you know Amber, you know that she's known for the intentionality she pours into everything, her long and meticulous Excel sheets, and of course the love that goes into all that she does. So please join me in welcoming Amber Mayfield Hewett.
Hey everyone! Oh my gosh, that was such a nice introduction, and it's so special that my first salon, I'm chatting with Athena, because Athena was my first hire. So I just beam with pride every time I see her.
Well, getting right into it, let's start at the beginning. Why did you start To Be Hosted, and what's the mission?
So I started To Be Hosted in 2017 because I really wanted to create events where you actually got to talk to people. I feel like we've all been to networking events where you're exchanging business cards, and it's pretty awful, right? But if you are going to do a supper club and you're going to sit down for dinner with somebody for 2 hours, it's either you're going to be really good friends or it's going to be quite awful. So just wanting to build community and using the dinner table and food as a center place to do that, and simultaneously, hey baby Zane, simultaneously amplifying Black chefs, Black sommeliers, and mixologists, and really working together to curate these experiences that I felt like were unique and fun and not something that I was seeing quite often in that time when I started the business.
And tell us, how did you begin to start To Be Hosted? What was the first thing you did?
You sure you want to know all that?
Take it from the beginning.
So I was still working in television at the time, and I was an assistant. I supported a bunch of executives, so I kept my corporate job, and I always like to be very real about that. I had a corporate job while I was doing it, and I was doing To Be Hosted on the side. I was living in Harlem in a high-rise, and my rent was like $900. So before we romanticize quitting your job and starting something, I had the ideal situation to start building this business. I had 3 roommates, or there was 3 of us, so I had 2 roommates, and I was like, hey, can you get your friends to come to this dinner? It'll be free for them. They're going to have to fill out a survey afterward, but she invited 8 people, the other one invited 8 people, I invited 8 people, and they were like the guinea pigs for our first dinner, and I spent, my own money on doing it, but it's because I really wanted this proof of concept and this research, and it went really well. I couldn't get them out the door at the end of the night, so I just kept doing them on the side until I couldn't, continue to do it that way anymore. But again, I was 23, so I was on my parents' health insurance. When I did make the leap, I had good conditions to make the leap.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of that, I'm sure we're all familiar with having a side hustle or passion project. When did you know it was time to take it from side hustle to full-fledged, full-time, full event agency?
So I think party planning and hosting was definitely what I was passionate about, and I wasn't finding a job in that realm that was gonna fulfill that passion. So I think I realized that when the business was going to suffer if I wasn't full-time, then that was the moment for me to go. When I was trying to take client meetings in the closet at the office, or people wanted me to come in person and do these meetings and have these events that were in the middle of the day or immediately after work, and I was, blowing through my vacation days, when it was going to be at the detriment of To Be Hosted, I was like, okay, I need to look at this. I need to make a savings plan. I need to figure out how many months of rent and utilities and all of the things I can stock up and say, okay, I can make this leap. I've got 6 to 8 months to make another dollar somewhere else, or I'm going to go back into the workforce. So that's when I had figured it out.
I'm sure there was an Excel sheet involved in that planning as well.
There's always an Excel sheet. I feel like you need to look at your money at all times and understand how it moves and where it goes. And I personally love to do that on Excel. But there are all sorts of apps you can use to do the same thing.
Can you tell us what's your philosophy or your secret sauce that you put on the to-be-hosted events to make them special?
Our secret sauce. So, okay, you guys all have these clipboards that we gave you. So, of course, this first tab has notes, but I put kind of my starting secret sauce on the second page. So I call it setting the vibe or vibe setting. And it really starts with understanding, like, what are you celebrating and how do you want that event to feel? And I think that how you make people feel is often like the latter part of events. People start to think about what's going to be my photo moment and what color are going to be my flowers. And I think all of that is for naught if you don't take a moment and say, why am I doing this? What do the people who are doing this with me need to get out of it? Like, should it feel like we're hanging out in a living room and we've got hot chocolate upstairs in the kitchen? Should it feel like my grandmother's house? Should it feel like a vacation? Like, figure out what that thing is. And I think starting there in events has always set us apart because we're really listening to our clients, we're listening to our diners, and we're like, okay, they want to feel like they're taking a trip to the Caribbean. Let's figure out what that menu is and tailoring each event to a feeling. So I use this. I gave you guys a copy of it so that when you're planning for your own events, whether they're personal or professional, you can really start to sit down and be like, okay, where are we starting? What does it feel like? What should it taste like? What should it sound like? And this can kind of become your source of truth throughout the planning process. So that's my jam.
And in your time since starting To Be Hosted, what changes have you seen happen in the social gathering space? And if you could project 5 years from now, what changes do you think will happen then?
Oh my gosh, 5 years from now. I mean, I think, of course, technology and social media is a big part of events, right? I remember the first person that said pics or it didn't happen, and like my soul died a little bit because now everything is about how is it going to look in pictures, or is there going to be a photo moment, or what are the photo moments in a space? And if you like think back to your childhood, that really wasn't it, right? You're like, what are these party favors about? So of course, like that is something I feel like has gotten particularly important when it comes to events, making sure they look a certain way, feel a certain way. I think the next 5 years is going to be how are we all interacting with technology. Of course, AI is growing and it's a whole other area to learn about, but also just like the smart technology you can put into events and seeing that kind of take the rise of what are people actually doing at an event versus what does it look like. I mean, I think the technology of this beautiful screen behind me, I've never seen our event photos in such HD. So thinking about the way that technology becomes like, this is the moment, right? So I think understanding how technology is going to continue to influence how we all relate to each other in good or in bad.
Yeah. And Zamora B wants to know, where should someone start if they want to get into the event planning business?
Where should someone start? Okay, so I mean, like, if you want to work in it or if you want a company in it, or both?
Let's do both.
Okay, so I hate to answer a question with a question. So I think if you want to work in events, I think you need to find other companies that like share your interests and like really do the research, right? Like if you don't really like food, please do not talk to me about working at my event company. It doesn't make sense, right? But so find the event company that like, this one specializes in fashion. This one has a lot of tech clients. This one does like personal parties and weddings. Figure out who mirrors what you want to do, and then see if they have PA or BA roles, which stands for like a production assistant or a brand ambassador. You know, it's the people who are working the door or they're doing the setup. Like that's the best way to get into those spaces and figure out all the different jobs that exist in them and then what you gravitate toward. Because in every event, there's like a catering event person, there's a technology-driven event person that coordinates stages and thinks about how things look on the stage. It's a whole different thing from what I do. So figure out what you want to do, make a list of everybody that's doing what you want to do, and then try to take those jobs that aren't necessarily sexy, but you'll get to meet everyone, and the people who notice you doing the tasks that they need done, that's how I find everybody. I mean, you were an intern. Me is like my favorite production assistant that now is our event coordinator. Same thing with Jasmine. Like they all start in these positions so that they show that like they care about people, they care about how people experience events, and then they can work their way up. So I would start there. And I would start there if you want to have your own event company too. Like I've been so many people's interns and so many people's PAs because you really get to learn all the details that go into it and why it matters.
So speaking for myself, I'm great at making the Pinterest board for an event, getting the vibes, like you did the exercise, how it feels, how it looks, how it smells. But getting into the practical details, after we've vision boarded up, what's the first practical step, or take us through the practical process of planning the event?
Yeah, so many practical steps. I mean, I like to use Excel sheets a lot. I use a lot of lists, which is why I gave you guys a clipboard full of lists. It's really creating a work back schedule, and I think that's something that is very transferable to whatever industry that you work in. If you have a goal in mind or an event date in mind, so let's say my, Friendsgiving is on November 20th, that's the deadline. Everything needs to be done. And so making a schedule that works backwards from there about, okay, well, I want to get the invitations out 4 weeks in advance. And the invitation sets the vibe for the event. So the invitation needs to tell people what to expect and what to wear and what to bring. And then from there, I got to set an RSVP date. Well, your RSVP date should make sense to the fact that you've got a grocery shop, or you've got to book a caterer, or you've got to buy, a different table setup than you normally have. Like everything should kind of ladder backwards to when you're trying to achieve something, and then you can build your schedule and get into the weeds of the details.
And I'm sure you've had a number of supper club dinners since the conception in 2017.
25.
We love that, very organized. And so how do you continue to find inspiration for the supper club events or for client events?
So for supper club events, I feel like I see some faces who have been at our supper club. So that's just really, I find the inspiration because I like to eat a lot, and I eat out a lot, and I go to other people's events and try to meet the chefs. So the inspiration really comes from the food that I want to eat and the experience that I want to give people, and making sure that we're giving different chefs an opportunity, and making sure that we're kind of broadening the horizons of people who come back to our dinners all the time. So I think, transferably to whatever it is, you got to get out in the world and like live, especially if you're in the business of entertaining people or party planning or talent or creative. Like if you stay in your little bubble all the time, then your work is going to look the same all the time. But if you like put a day on your calendar, like Tuesday is for shenanigans. I'm getting out into the world. I'm going to this museum. I'm going to go check out this show. Like I really do put a day on my calendar where I'm like, there's no meetings. We're just going to see where the world takes me and live. And then I think you'll find your inspiration.
I love that. A day for shenanigans. I'm adding that to my calendar.
Not too many days.
And so I've heard you say that party planning starts with the venue, because if you don't have a place to do it, what are you doing? And Bianca F. wants to know, what resources do you use for venue sourcing?
Oh, for venue sourcing, I mean, it's a lot of the same thing, getting out into places and being curious. I'll walk into some restaurants just before they open and just like, hey, do you do events here? So I think you should get out into the world and find them that way. I mean, you can, of course, use Google. I use Peerspace. I use Splacer. I feel like those are the main ones, because then you kind of get down this rabbit hole of like, this space is similar to that one, and then you can find them, and then I just go to them. Like, again, a day is scheduled where you go around and shenanigan. Like we will go see different venues, even if we don't have an event in mind, just so that when we do, we can say, oh, we've seen it. We already kind of understand how it works, and it comes to mind sooner. And, things are in Excel, things are in PowerPoint, so we can always reference back, like, okay, I need to find a venue that's in Meatpacking District that can fit 100 people, and, like, filter out my Excel sheet, and I can see where that is.
So once you have the venue and you got the vibe and the music and all the elements are starting to come together, how do you make sure that you don't lose the plot and everything stays cohesive and organized?
Not losing the plot is really like half the battle. So I think that feeling exercise and that like the reason you're doing something, having that written down somewhere that you revisit, and not just like on a document that you don't open again, but like on top of your budget. This is why we're having the party. This is who needs to be there. This is the feeling. So like when you're looking at a decision of should I spend $1,000 on flowers or should I spend that $1,000 on food? Well, if the goal is to have a really good dinner party, there's your answer. So I think having that kind of central return to is very helpful. I mean, I'm looking at my friend Steph who's planning a wedding. She's got to do the same thing, right? Like, do you really care about these flowers, or do you really need the photos that you can look at back at when you're 50? So doing the exercise of the why and what you care about and what you want it to feel like, and returning to that during the planning process will make a lot of the decisions like screaming at you.
And Naya V wants to know, how do you delegate tasks so you avoid burnout?
How do I delegate tasks? I think for me, our team is small but mighty, so there's 5 of us, and I think all of us have our superpowers, and so really identifying our superpowers and sticking to it. Like the day I realized that I should not send Athena to load-in day was the day that you were great, right? Because now I'm delegating all of this creative stuff and all of this social stuff. So like, make a list of what needs to be done, but then make a list of also the superpowers of your team, because then you can delegate things that they can knock out of the park and understand like where your gaps are, so that it'll be easier to delegate to people who are excited about doing those things and really take ownership over doing those things. And I think when those 2 things are not in alignment of like, it needs to be done and this person's good at it, that's where you're like, oh, I have to do it, and now I'm stressed and I'm burning out. I mean, that person then probably shouldn't be on your team. You should get somebody else who fills the gap and is excited about it. So it's a lot of testing and trial and error.
And I'm sure there's an Excel sheet to track the strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, actually, they do.
So we're going to transition to hosting at home, which is the part that I definitely need to tap into. Courtney wants to know, what's some go-to servingware that every host should have, and some easy recipes that make everything feel a little fancy?
Oh gosh, do we have time for all of the things that I have? It has to be the go-to things that I have.
The go-to, I'm starting off. This is my first Friendsgiving that I'm hosting, and this is the one set I can have that'll make it feel cute, homey, and like I did this before.
Okay, well, I love like a wooden serving board. I feel like you got to bring the elements out. I feel like that's the season for it. So I definitely like beautiful wooden serving boards. Yeah, I feel like you can put a lot on wooden serving boards. You know, big utensils to actually serve the things that you have. I mean, I think besides just like naming all the things that I have, like actually look at your own inventory. If you're inviting 12 people over and you have a set of 8 dishes, then we've got to like fill that need next. So take the inventory of like, do you have everything you need to actually serve the menu that you want, and then fill in from there. I also put, because I love y'all, on the very last page, I put like all my favorite things on here. So you can reference these during the holiday season. Okay. So I mentioned the wooden boards. I get mine from Make and Stowe, but there's a ton of resources on here, like A Floral. I order a lot of like faux flowers or dried flowers, and that just makes it look like I did a little fancy arrangement for people. I mean, there's planners on here. There's places where I get my linens, my candles. There's our Amazon storefront link on here. So I try to have a lot of the things that you can get from these places. Nice glassware, the things that make people feel festive is what I think you should look for and start with. Like, I don't break out my wooden serving board on a random Monday, but if I got it out here, you know we're celebrating. So the things that make you feel excited to host people is really what you should prioritize.
And then as far as, easy recipes that feel fancy and planning a menu in general, where do we start for that? How do we make sure that we hit every food group, that we adhere to all the dietary restrictions, that we don't miss anything at the grocery store, because not all of us got that fancy fridge up there to know.
We should all have that fancy fridge up there. So I think you should start with, in your RSVP process, if you can ask people to share their dietary restrictions or your allergies with you. I think that's really important to helping you track what you should have for everybody. I mean, when I'm welcoming people, I always feel like your welcome bite is like, it's got to be a good one. So I like doing different toasts that are like layered with different cheeses or something. Not necessarily like making a full charcuterie board, because sometimes that takes a lot of work, but actually literally like toast, little whipped brie, and a little something on top of it, whatever feels festive, because then it's just more of a grab and go situation versus like, I've got my drink and I'm trying to make this thing and I'm trying to talk to this person. So That feels easy to me. I mean, I think you got to be honest too about the amount of time, the amount of people, and if you're actually a good cook. So, if there are certain things I can't make. There are things that I'm really good at making, and then there are things that I have no business making, and that's when I'll outsource that, whether that's to a friend or a family member that's going to be attending the gathering, or if that's hiring a chef and saying, hey, I'm gonna make the salad and a little bite of something in the drinks. Can you bring me the protein and the sides, or getting it from your restaurant, or going to the bakery and getting the dessert and the bread from there. I feel like we have to retire this experience where hosting is synonymous with being in the kitchen all day long. It is okay to have a menu that is homemade, semi-homemade, and outright store-bought.
Vanessa P. says, I tend to pull out all the stops when entertaining. What are some ways that I can still live out my hostess energy without the full extravaganza?
Still live out your hostess energy without the full extravaganza. I mean, I think you don't always have to host a dinner party. I think you can host something that's either a little bit earlier and it ends by dinner time, or it's a little bit later so people have dinner first and then they come over. So then it's more so about having a really good beverages and really good snacks and leaning into this nostalgia of snacks. So it feels festive and it feels like you should get dressed up and have a theme, but it also doesn't feel like you've got to put in a lot of work or a lot of money. Like potato chips are very appropriate for a celebration.
And what are the one thing or the few things that you feel like everyone always forgets to double check or check off their list when planning?
Oh, there's so many things. I think I put that on here too. Mm-hmm. I feel like that is something that I would do. Let me check. Yes, there is a page here. It's called your pre-party checklist, and it's all the things that people usually forget. So it's inventorying all your plates and glassware to make sure you have enough, all the way down to do you have all the toiletries that you need, just in case people I'm staying overnight. Well, you got extra body wash in the guest bathroom or not. So it's checking all of that stuff. It's making sure you have enough ice. It's making sure you steam the linens. I mean, unless you're hiring a photographer that's going to edit all of that out in post, you don't want people to see all these wrinkles in your linen. So this is my checklist. And in events, sometimes we call it a punch list because it's everything you want to knock out before the doors open. So this is my holiday hosting punch list.
And now that we have all the elements together, we ain't forget nothing. We outsource to a chef because we have no business. How do we make sure that we don't get overwhelmed and just stay calm?
How do we make sure we don't get overwhelmed and stay calm? Well, you don't have a choice. That's number one. You have to take that out of your vocabulary, that you can freak out or that you can get nervous. I think one of the best things I heard early in my career is that people hire party planners or, social media people or any other service. They hire that person because they know what they're doing and they're a professional. So when you were a kid and you fell down and you scraped your knee, your mom or your parent figure did not start screaming and crying with you. So in this regard, that is who you are. When your client starts freaking out, when your friend starts freaking out, when your fiance starts freaking out, you just get to look at them and say, it's going to be okay. The only way out is through. So it's really not an option. If you as the host start getting all riled up and all upset about what's happening, everybody's going to follow that energy, and that's how everybody's going to feel. And energy transfers. That's something that we know for sure. So even if I think everything is going wrong tonight, when you walked in here, I smiled at you. You shouldn't know how I feel. So that is just what you have to do. I'm sorry. I don't have anything else for you.
You don't have to apologize. You're right. The only way out is through.
Yeah, that's just what it is.
And Amora M wants to know, what do you do to encourage guests to mingle and get to know each other and not, have that awkward moment?
Oh, okay. So, at work functions, you guys all got your wristbands. So that's something I try to do because you can then look down at the wristband colors and say, this person also chose blue. That's an indication that they might have some similar interest to me. So I try to give them things that will be natural icebreakers or conversation starters or things like that. But I think in a non-work capacity or, if you're hosting for work or home, I think you have to remember that when you are introducing people, I think the first thing we do is introduce them as they relate to you. I want you to meet my dear friend. We went to college together. She was in my sorority. and this is so-and-so, and we work together in the same department. And then you leave those two people, and they're looking at each other, and the only thing they have in common is you. So now when you leave that conversation, it's awkward, and they have nowhere to go. So I think you have to think through before people come, like, oh, this is Athena, and Athena's from Texas, and this is my other friend who's from Texas, or this is, Jackie, and Jackie really enjoys talking about, I don't know, like marine biology, and this person works at something related to marine biology, so that when you're making those introductions, you're introducing them in a way that gives them somewhere to go, so that you're not awkwardly like, all right, I gotta leave this conversation, but I don't know if you two are gonna connect or not. So really making sure your introductions are about them and not about you.
I really love the wristbands. The wristbands are the best way to be like, we both don't want to talk about work. Let's talk about anything else.
Exactly.
And so now that, we're in the holiday season and a lot of us probably have at least one invite already lined up for Friendsgiving or whatever else, Sherry S. wants to know, is it bad taste to bring a store-bought dessert instead of a homemade one to a dinner party?
What did I say earlier? Y'all better know your strengths. If you cannot bake, you go find somebody that makes a really good cake or a really good pie or really good cookies, and you buy them and you don't feel guilty about it. I love bringing blondery to the party. That's why y'all got blondery. I didn't make for you guys. I think it's absolutely fine. And I think it's even really special if it's somebody's business that you're really excited about or chef that you're really excited about. Then you can say, hey, girl, I didn't have time to make anything, but I picked up this cake from Kamari Mick because that's my favorite black baker in the city, and it's really, really good. And then you've got a story piece for everybody else that you meet in the room.
Beautiful. Well, I hope you guys took some notes, and if you still have a question that's left unanswered, we're going to open it up to any questions from the audience. Y'all don't be shy now, because when y'all are sitting there at your Amazon cart. Yes.
Do we have a mic for her?
You gotta hold that, sorry. Microphone check, 1, 2, okay. So, first of all,
Hi.
I just wanna thank you for this thorough list. This is so thoughtful, and you really was deliberate about giving us an experience and walking away with something that's resourceful and setting us up to win. So thank you for that, really appreciate it.
Thank
and
you.
These pictures are amazing. They're so vivid, they're alive, and they're engaging. It's like, well, I want to be a part of this. So thank you.
Thank you for saying that. And so the photographer is in the house tonight. Her name is Rashida Zagon. You might have seen her floating around somewhere. Oh, there she is. She shoots me all the time, and she's the only person who's allowed to do so. But I love collaborating with Rashida because we spend so much time thinking about what are the images that are going to make a good story, and not necessarily just like the posed images, but like, how does this photo look like you want to eat it, or the moment before you're about to stick your spoon in it? So I think I've been really grateful to work very closely with her to be like, no, we want to go for this feeling. So I appreciate your collaboration, and I appreciate you noticing. Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry. That was my fault. He had I'm sorry. We'll go here, and then we'll go there.
All right. Hi. This is so great. You talked so much about, the necessities. You put a great list in here. I'm curious, is there anything that you feel like is common at dinner parties, or people feel like they need to have it, but it's really overrated?
Overrated. Oh, my goodness.
Or unnecessary.
Unnecessary. I mean, if you're hosting at home, I love a good decor moment. I really do. I love a tablescape. I love a runner. I love florals. But I think you have to ask yourself if all of those details are necessary at home, or even when you're playing professionally, if you're doing like a family style menu. So I think having these big, abundant tablescapes that don't make sense functionally for what you're serving and how many people are there, that to me does not track. Everything else I feel like, to each their own.
Hello, my name is Linda. I'm a musician, and I want to, plan a brunch / concert kind of thing. So what is your advice in planning a brunch, and then also how soon is too soon to plan an event like that?
I actually think you need to carve out more time than normal for most things because I think two important things happen. The logistics of a music event are very different than the logistics of a food event. So the sooner that you can find a venue that accomplishes two things. One, you personally like the acoustics in that space. Two, you can figure out where your setup is going to be in a way that makes sense for all of the AV people involved. Like get them to the venue, make them walk through it, make sure it all checks out, make sure you're checking how far away your outlets are, your Wi-Fi, everything that needs to make the show great, and then go in the kitchen and do the same thing. Like, does this space work for firing a brunch menu, and like what can that menu be? Like there is a difference between like different types of food that works in different spaces. I've signed myself up for terrible occasions where we have no kitchen and like just all the things that our chefs would need, but it looked really great and it sounded really great. And so you have to find the marriage between those two things. So I think if you start something maybe like 4 to 6 months before you even want to host it, knowing that this is going to be like your debut kind of like thing that's really important to you, and find a model and a space and the financials that make really good sense. I mean, if you're like 4 to 6 months, I don't have that time. I want to get this thing out in 3 months. I mean, you just got to hustle. It's all about finding the venue that's going to allow you to accomplish those goals, and then find the chef that works for your budget. So if you know that you'd rather spend a little bit more money on the AV and the sound in that experience, then you need to find a chef that's going to work with you with a particular budget and say, okay, brunch is not going to have caviar on the pancakes. It's going to, figure out the way to make all of those things make sense. I think anything is possible. It's just how much time do you have to dedicate it, and how much urgency do you have toward getting this thing out in the world. And I'll say, listen, if it feels better to just start, our first supper club was in a, it was at, I'm not going to say the name of the place, but it was at a co-working space where all the lights were on. There was no kitchen. There was nothing that made sense for the event. But for me, it was important to get it out into the world and start doing it and get the practice. So if that's the same thing for you, well, do you wait for it to get warm and you do it outside and you're not paying for a space, and then you're figuring out what type of like movable brunch thing you want to do. I think there's so many ways. I hope I'm not giving you too many words, but
This is great.
Okay, so yeah, that's what I would start with. When you want to have it and work backwards, find the right venue that makes sense for what you want to accomplish, and then figure out what you're willing to sacrifice. Does this event need to be champagne and donuts, and the next one could be a full brunch? And just, go from there.
Champagne and donuts sound real good.
It sounds great. It's all about how you sound, right? You get a little jazz, a little champagne, a little donut. Write that down.
I know.
Hi,
Yes.
my name is Gabby.
Hi.
I'm a licensed esthetician, wax specialist, and a lash tech out here in Brooklyn. And my mom actually has me here. She's here for her phone, so I didn't even know this was happening, but I am happy to be here. This is beautiful.
Thank you.
I have 2 questions, actually. I may have missed the first one, but how long have you been in business, and what are your goals for 2024?
Yes, good question. So I have been in business going on 7 years. I started the company in 2017. Yeah, we're making it. We survived a pandemic. We're doing okay. I mean, my goal, honestly, is to just stay here and work with bigger clients, have more parties, continue to grow my team. I think everything is just rooted in, like, I'm doing the thing that I love and that I'm really, really passionate about, and so developing consistency in that. Because I mentioned, like, we're on supper club number 25. Well, that's because there was a pandemic in the middle of when I started my business, and then rolling off a pandemic year, none of y'all wanted to eat with strangers, so it was very weird, right? Like, you just got out of your mask. What do you mean I'm about to have family style with this random person? So now, keeping the business alive through those things and adapting, now I'm like, okay, if nothing else goes wrong, we can maybe, like, stride a little. So I'm just trying to stay here next year. Yeah. Hi.
Mia always talks about you. So I'm
Good
so
things
excited.
or like
always good things.
Okay.
I actually am very inspired by you. So
if she said anything bad.
of course. No, but she like speaks so well of you that I'm just so inspired by you. So I'm very excited.
Thank
to
you.
be here. And I'm also a business owner. I have a music magazine and consulting agency, and I think my problem, I guess coming out of COVID, is not really knowing how to connect with potential clients outside of social media. So I guess that's my question for you, if you have advice on how you organize yourself to reach out or scout for clients.
Client hunting. Yeah, that's half the battle. It's actually 75% of the battle. So I think depending on the nature of your business, for us, LinkedIn is a really good resource. I always say that LinkedIn is where the money resides, because when you're sliding in DMs on LinkedIn, it's already in the setting of work. So I've had a lot of success cold pitching people on LinkedIn. Now, I do think you should do appropriate research. So find people who share the titles that make sense for who you're looking for. And I would just approach them really nicely. I always heard, ask a question and get a job, ask for a job and get advice. So I just, reach out to people and I say, hey, I noticed you work in such and such. It's very similar to what I do at To Be Hosted. Do you outsource your events, and would you be interested in seeing our event proposal? And I'll say that, I'll send hundreds of those and not hear back, but I'll hear back from 2, and they'll be our biggest clients for the year. So I think not discounting just the cold pitching of what you do, and at the same time having a really concise representation of what you do. So for us, we have what's called a capabilities deck. I think it's 24 pages long. It's obnoxious, but when it started, it was 5 pages long. It's just here's who we are, here's what we do, here's how we do it, and here's who we've already done it for. And leading with that was just enough to get the conversation going. If it's somebody that you're 2 degrees connected from, you might be able to get them on the phone, and once you've gotten them on the phone, maybe you'll get them to coffee. I always say we don't spend any money marketing or advertising, but we'll spend money taking someone to coffee or asking if they want to sit down and have coffee with us, because I think a lot of businesses, real relationships, and actually understanding what people want from your services before you start saying, me, hire me. Well, you don't even know what you need them to hire them for. So ask them, what are your priorities for 2024? What are you looking for in this particular service? How have you done it in the past? Are you open to seeing how someone else would do it differently? How do I get into your vendor system? Because that's a whole other part of doing business in corporate America. So start with those questions and genuinely try to build relationships with people. And it'll take some time, but you'll see some of those relationships, down the line. You're like, oh no, I'm really excited about you because I've been talking to you for 2 years and now I've got the project for you. I hope that kind of helps. Okay. Anybody else have questions? Oh, hi.
That was a little bit loud. Hi. How you doing? My name is Dwayne from Queens.
Hi.
Such an honor to be here. Listen, I think my question was answered. I believe my question was answered the last question. So that was a great question. So I'm going to reframe it. My mama is an event planner, and she does mostly family events and things like that. So, I definitely want to take some nuggets back to her. I guess my modified question would be, how do you go about moving from working for free, that kind of freelance, I'll do your event because I want the experience. How do you kind of get past that and start asking for what you think you deserve?
Yeah, transitioning from exposure. So when I started, there were maybe a few instances that I would volunteer my services, or if it was something that was really exciting of there's a photographer or a florist that wants to promote their services, I would barter for services with them so that I would have the stuff in my portfolio. But I think once you have things in your portfolio, you should put on paper the number that you want and be prepared to provide services that are in line with that number. But I do think you should get out of that as fast as you can, especially for women-owned businesses and Black-owned businesses and BIPOC-owned businesses. You cannot stay there for too long because our counterparts don't stay there at all. So I think once you've got the evidence that you can do the job, you've got the references that you can do the job, put the number out there. And then I think, if somebody is sticker shocked by the number, I think you can, again, ask them questions like, well, what's a price point that you feel comfortable? And I'll adapt my proposal to something that makes sense for that price point, especially if there's someone you're really keen on working on there. So I would say throw the big number out there and then be ready to negotiate, but keep to a limit how frequently you're willing to do things for free, because I do think it's a trap that it'll be harder to climb. I remember doing some events that were think I charged like $4,000 for a project that I worked on for 10 months. And once I looked back at how many hours I spent on it, I was making a penny an hour. And I was like, oh my gosh, right? So once you've had that moment once, then it was harder for me to get that client up to the number that I felt would be respectful. So you really don't want to stay down there too low because they get too used to having access to you. And that's something that I had to work on because for so long my clients were used to just working with me. And now there's 5 of us. I'm like, you have to pay this rate. I have to pay them. Like, so yeah, that my best advice is like 1 or 2 and then it's done. Does that feel approachable or does that feel so scary? Okay, fair. Yeah, get the good pictures, get the portfolio, and then move on.
I think I'm next.
Oh.
Hey, Amber. So I've had the pleasure of working with you, and you taught me so much. So thank you for doing this and sharing your knowledge with everyone. But I think the one thing I haven't asked you yet was, let's say an event is all said and done, and you put together a dinner. How do you measure success? Like, how do you know, like, whoo, okay, the vibes were right. I delivered what I said I would. You know, people aren't feeling awkward. How do you know? Is it a feeling? Do you have a benchmark of like, okay, check, vibes were good, check, people were talking. Like, what is your benchmark for success?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question. So I think that you have to be present in your event. And so in theory, if you've done all this lead up work to plan in advance and think through everything in advance, by the time you're actually at the event, you shouldn't be running around like a chicken with no head, right? So if you can actually be in the room and go talk to people and talk to them when they walk in and notice, like, is this person talking to that person, or is there too many people too awkward, or there too many people that's been staring at their phone all night? Like, those kind of like environmental metrics, I feel like, become part of it, because then you can also pivot, you know, like if everybody is looking a little awkward, the music needs to be louder and I'm gonna go mingle a little bit more. So I try to just be really present and observe, and then I also just ask people on their way out, like, what did you like, what did you not like? And getting that kind of feedback, I feel like, is so important to party planning in particular, because it's events that are for people. So of course we're gonna have somebody that's checking off how many people were here, how many people posted about it, how many people reshared these photos, and all of those things are metrics that are for people who have a certain type of job. But for everybody else, you need to enjoy your life and you need to feel like where you went added value. So when you're nodding your head at what I'm saying, I'm like, okay, great, they're gonna come back for another salon because I gave them something. So I would just say be really, really observant and save the numbers for when they're necessary.
Hi.
Hi. Your face looks very familiar. Are you a chef?
Yes.
Okay. See, I be in the street.
We're in a lot of circles. Okay, so my big question is, I throw a lot of themed events. Like my big one is like I throw a lot of murder mystery parties.
Mm-hmm.
So
That sounds fun.
it's fun, but people need to be on time because there's like a cadence of like how the party needs to go. Like someone's got to die. So
I got to go to this party.
like, how do you get people to be on time, especially for things that have like a time frame that needs to kind of continue for the flow? Like, you know, some parties, you know.
Yeah, no, this is something that everybody struggles with. At 6:05, I was like, is anybody coming? So I think that maybe perhaps communicating what about your event is specific and time themed, and maybe even implementing like the door closes kind of time could be important. And I think doing so, you know, you've got to be realistic. If it's a middle of the week event and you know that you attract an audience that does have a corporate job or they're coming from somewhere, you might not choose 6 o'clock, you might have to choose 7. But in your communication to them, I think you should really explicitly say, hey, the experience of this party hinges on you guys being here by 7:15. So if you want to get every bang for your buck and be really infiltrated into this experience, you should be here at X time. And if you arrive after X time, unfortunately the doors will be closed and the event is non-refundable. Like, I would lay it all out for them, because I do think, one, over communicating with people, not everybody is used to going to events where people put that level of detail into them, or, you know, going to food events where everything is very specific on what time it's coming coming out. Not everybody is used to that. So I think if you over communicate about it, put it on their calendar. I think I put it on a bunch of y'all's calendar tonight. So they're getting these reminders, or at least reaching out to you as a host and saying, hey, it's not looking like 6:30 is realistic, and then you can pivot. But the over communication of the expectations, I feel like is the best way to do it. And if they really keep breaking your rules, I mean, you might not have to invite them back. Yeah. Okay.
I think that's it. Thank you guys all for coming out tonight.
Yes, thank you so much for coming. I can't wait to hear all your feedback.